Estamos ao
Y me
vivo,
descuentas, ¿no?
Estamos ao vivo, senhor presidente.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches, bonsoir, boa tarde, boa noite, good afternoon, good evening. Today, we continue our seminar in Muntú with the professor, Dr. Alain Lawo-Sukham. Here, I would like to make sure we correct something. Like you see in the screen, one of his last name is Sukham, is without the H. This is very important because, you know, the naming make you come into the word and make you represent the word. So it's very important to rectify that. So it's Sukham without the H. Hoy vamos a ver la presentación del profesor y doctor Alain Lawo-Sukham, que es de la Universidad de Texas, AM. Y claro, como nombrar es importante, porque nombrar nos hace acceder al mundo y nos hace representar al mundo. Como lo ven en la pantalla, uno de sus apellidos es Sukham sin la H. Hoy continuamos con outro seminário do Muntú. O professor doutor Alain Lawo-Sukham vai fazer uma apresentação. A propósito do professor doutor Alain Lawo-Sukham, seu nome, sobrenome Sukham, não tem a letra H. Então, se escreve sem a letra H. Aujourd'hui, nous continuons notre série de séminaires internationaux Muntú avec le professeur Alain Lawo-Sukham. Et comme vous savez, nommer est très important, ça nous fait advenir au monde et puis ça nous fait représenter aussi le monde. Donc, son nom, l'un de ses noms de famille, c'est Sukham sans H. Today, Dr. Alain Lawo-Sukham, who is professor, by the way, at the University of Texas A&M. Professor Lawo-Sukham is also an associate professor over there in the Department of Global Language and Culture, and is also the director of the newly program of Africana Studies. He will talk about same-sex silencing same-sex relations in Africa, the case study of Equatorial Guinea, but it's not exactly about Equatorial Guinea. It's a case study about cultural production written in Spanish, right? Because the text that he will talk about is about a Cameroonian writer. So this is very important to point it because it makes a slight difference. Pues hoy, Dr. Lawo-Sukham, que es de la Universidad de Texas AM, va a hablar de silenciando las relaciones del mismo sexo en África. El caso de estudio, el estudio del caso preciso, no es sobre Guinea Ecuatorial, sino más bien sobre la producción cultural escrita en español en África. ¿Por qué? Porque la escritora en cuestión es de Camerún, que originalmente no es un país de habla hispana. Hoje, o professor Alain Lawo-Sukham vai falar silenciando as relações do mesmo sexo na África. Vai falar particularmente de um caso da escrita, de produção cultural na África, não especificamente da Guiné Equatorial. Então, isso era importante saber. Aujourd'hui, donc, le professeur Alain Lawo-Sukham nous parlera du déni de relations de même sexe en Afrique Et il nous parlera particulièrement d'une écrivaine qui est pas forcément de la Guinée équatoriale, mais qui est de l'Afrique, mais qui écrit en espagnol. Le professeur Alain Lawo-Sukham aura 45 minutes, de 45 minutes à 1 heure, et puis après, on passera aux questions. So, Dr. Lawo-Sukham won't speak in Spanish. He will speak in English. He will have 45 to 1 hour. And then after that, we will have a series of questions. Without any further ado, Dr. Lawo-Sukham, brother, you have the floor.
Thank you, Brother Clément. Muchas gracias. Et merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité sur ce plateau et dans cette conférence que j'espère va être grandissant. I'm going to speak in English because the paper I'm presenting today was written in English and published in English in what we call in this journal, the South Central Review, published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2022. Then it's something that just got published by Johns Hopkins Press in the South Central Review. I'm also going to speak in English because I asked some people to be here, and then a lot of them don't understand Spanish. Then English is their first language. And then time to time during our discussion, we can switch to Spanish or French. Like Clément said, I am here at A&M. I'm originally from Cameroon, and then also I work on Afro-Hispanic or African Hispanic literature and culture. And the topic I want to present today is something that I haven't done that before, even though I wanted to do that, and also something that within the Africana circle is considered is taboo. Talking about same-sex sexual relation or homosexuality in African circles is not something that we do every day. It's considered taboo. But here, instead of focusing on Francophone or Anglophone or Lusophone literature, I focus on the Hispanic literature in Africa. And then particularly focusing on the novel of Danielle Nicole Mboume. I think that is the first time I see somebody written a autobiography about homosexuality, in this arena of African Hispanic, literature. And then this is a book that was published in 2018. That is very recent. And then that's going to be the material I'm using to talk about silence by denial, the problematic of same-sex sexual relation in African Hispanic novel, La Única, Esperanza by Danielle Nicole Mboume. And then I don't know if the writer is known, because even if you go to Google, you won't see a lot about her. You can know about her through Facebook, but haven't gathered that much information about her. But the novel, La Única Esperanza, is on Amazon, and you can have it. It's a very good book. It's an autobiography. The topic of same-sex sexual relation remained taboo in African literature, despite the emergence of writers who narrate homosexual acts and identities in their literary productions. Daniel Vinal suggests that, I quote, for the majority of African writers, homophilia is excessively a deviation introduced by colonialists or their descendants, by outsiders of all kinds, Arab, French, English, Métis, and so on. It is difficult for them to conceive that homophilia might be the act of a Black African. End of quote. The avoidance of same-sex practice in African writers follow the political trend of repression and rejection of homosexuality in most African countries. According to Chantal Zabous, I quote, in 2008, 86 United Nations member countries had laws that criminalize same-sex relation and some 37 African countries, along with Middle Eastern countries, constituted a majority of those, so that it is dangerous and even life-threatening to be out in Africa. The idea of same-sex sexual relations as alien to African culture is rampant in the 20th century and contemporary African politics. End of quote. The tendency to view the idea of same-sex sexual acts as foreign to the African continent is best illustrated by Deborah Amory when she suggested that the rejection of homosexuality is, a quote, best captured by the recurring and insistent refrain, "There is no homosexuality in Africa." End of quote. This refrain is chanted like a mantra by politicians, scholars, and lay people alike, and is often accompanied by the similarly insidious accusation that homosexuality is a Western perversion imposed upon or adopted by African population. The transnational or transcontinental journey and story of Danielle Nicole Mboume, as portrayed in her autobiography novel La Única, Esperanza, The Only Hope, provide a case study to problematize the idea of same-sex sexual practice in Cameroon and Sub-Saharan Africa in general. This autobiography not only gives the reader a first-hand account into the life of the author and a better insight into how her experience have shaped her as a person, but also provides a better understanding of the society in which she lives or lived. I argue that the tendency to silence same-sex acts is the result of a collective denial of the evidence that same-sex erotic practices are an historical part of some traditional African societies. I also argue that the denial based on the myth of homosexuality as un-African is accentuated by colonial and postcolonial forces. The denial is not divorced from its negative consequences on the victim, who are suffering from family, social ostracism, and death sentence. Ironically, the idea of same-sex act also serves as a powerful political tool against the member of the regime in power responsible for criminalizing homosexual behavior. In this context, same-sex practices are weaponized for political, religious, and personal gain. La Única Esperanza, The Only Hope, published in 2018 in Barcelona, narrates the journey of Danielle Mboume from her native land in Cameroon to Spain. The tragedy of her life as a lesbian is riddled with persecution, abuses, and ostracism from the family, community, and state law enforcement and judiciary apparatus. Faced with potential death, she decided to take the path of exile at age 16. The journey of exile led her to the Republic of Congo, where she met her partner Ingrid. Persecuted for being lesbians, they migrated to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Unfortunately, the anti-gay sentiment in RDC forced them to leave the country on a truck full of goods and seek refuge in South Africa. In 1996, South Africa was the first jurisdiction in Africa to provide constitutional protection to LGBT people, and the first African nation to pass the Union Bill, which legalized same-sex marriage, and that was in 2006. Although the constitutional and legal system in South Africa theoretically recognizes same-sex relationship, Daniel and Ingrid were constantly harassed. Fearing for their life, they abandoned South Africa and headed north by trucks, buses, and train to Morocco, where they crossed the Mediterranean Sea and were rescued by the Spanish Guardia Civil of Ceuta. They were transported to Madrid on September 2011 and wedded in 2012. This is the synopsis of the book. And the book is right here. This is the book right here. Beside the moving story of exile of the main protagonist, This autobiography provides a rich depiction of the state of same-sex sexual relation in Cameroon and Africa, as well as historical data, events, and evidences. In this context, autobiography became a referential text, according to Philippe Lejeune. The critic Bart Beatty points the way in which autobiography embodies realism and legitimacy. I quote, autobiography, therefore, become a mode which foreground both realism and opposed to the tradition of fantasy, and the sense of the author as an artist demanding legitimacy. End of quote. Furthermore, autobiography serve as a liberating tool and space for oppressed people, as Julia Swindoll argued in Victorian Writing and Writing Woman. As a lesbian, Black, and underprivileged Black woman, Danielle Mboume's autobiography became the voice of the oppressed LGBT community in her homeland and abroad. Her life experience and tribulations shed light on the difficulties and, even worse, the capital punishment for same-sex sexual acts in some African nations. The collective homophobic rhetoric is rooted in a deep-seated denial of precolonial same-sex sexual practices. This denial has led to the prevalent notion that same-sex practices are un-African and foreign to African tradition. The deniers base most of their argument on law, religious beliefs, and the preservation of what they call, quote-unquote, African value and morals, which are, in general, a result of personal preferences that fit social pattern, historical amnesia, ignorance, or the lack of skill to critically look at the source of information, evaluate evidence and explanation, as Gail Sinatra and Barbara often argue in the case of denier in the book Sounds Denial, published in 2021. Cameroon, like many other African countries, have adopted a kind of homophobic or transphobic legislature in their constitution. The criminalization of same-sex sexual relation is mainly referenced in the Penal Code 2016, Article 3471, prohibits sexual relation with a person of the same sex with a penalty of between 6 months to 5 years imprisonment, as well as a fine. It is important to note that Cameroon's first penal code, enacted in 1965, was kind of silent on the criminalization of same-sex sexual activity. However, an amendment introduced in 1972 added the offense of homosexuality, which remained in effect until today. The criminalization of same-sex sexual relation has strengthened the belief that they are un-African. Besides the legal system, cultural and religious beliefs have also contributed to the denial of homoerotic practices as part of African culture and human condition. The ostracism suffered by Danielle Mboume and other homosexuals from their family and community at large is rooted on the belief that homosexuality, quote, is a curse in Cameroonian culture and a sin for the follower of Christianity and Islam, which are the main religion in Cameroon and in Africa in general. Although the present-day follower of traditional religion are fiercely opposed to Christianity and Islam, viewed as imported religion, they all agree on the demonization of same-sex relation. The many attempts of de-homosexualize lesbian characters through Christian exorcism and spiritual healing ceremonies performed by healer or shaman reinforce the belief among deniers that homosexual behavior is artificial, a perversion of sexuality and foreign to the heteronormativity of the African cultures. The mystification of same-sex relation as unnatural, witchcraft, and demonic act that necessitate the intervention of a traditional healer is visible in the following quote, where Danielle Mboume's mother take her to the traditional healer. Dice, tenía 14 años cuando mi madre, con el consentimiento de mi familia paterna, me llevó a un curandero tradicional de un pueblo para reconducirme, porque entendían mi homosexualidad como una enfermedad y que Satán me había poseído. Allí, en la casa de curandero, me hicieron blindaje barro los senos con la intención de quitar de mi cuerpo el espíritu satánico. El curandero me gritaba que era para curarme de esa maldad de secta. Sin embargo, yo sabía que no estaba metida en una secta ni poseída. End of quote. The cure of homosexuality by exorcism is also manifested in the recommendation of Danielle Mboume's friend to seek the deliverance in church. Cito, cuando le hicimos entender que sus compañeros nos informaran de que ella era lesbiana, con un tono violento, la mujer respondió que ya no era lesbiana, que un pastor la curó de la homosexualidad y desde entonces entregó su vida a Cristo. Nos ofreció también su plena disponibilidad para acompañarnos a su iglesia y que su pastor orara sobre nosotras. Nos afirmó de que lo que estábamos haciendo era obra del espíritu malicioso que reinaba en nosotras. Even though foreign religions like Christianity and Islam in African continent condemn same-sex sexual relation, many Africans consider them as a Western/foreign intrusion. As Danielle Mboume point out, quote, la existencia cultural de la homosexualidad a menudo es rechazada y estigmatizada en los países africanos, considerándola un vicio introducido por los occidentales durante el periodo de la colonización. The popular idea of homosexuality as an intrusion of Western lifestyle in Africa has been embraced by African politicians, religious leaders, and traditional spokesmen. For example, Ashibembe claimed that, I quote, there is the argument of inauthenticity, the claim that homosexuality was unknown in precolonial Africa and was only introduced to the continent through European expansion, end of quote. Danielle Bignal observed that African writers have espoused the idea that homosexuality is a colonial enterprise. I quote, for the majority of African writers, homophilia is exclusively a deviation introduced by colonialists or their descendants, but outsiders of all kinds, like I said before. Colonialism and same-sex practices are viewed as part of the process of exploitation of the African continent, but outsiders. All the above homophobic discourses have reinforced the idea that same-sex acts are un-African, despite the evidence that some traditional society in Cameroon practice same-sex sexual relation as part of their culture and religious heritage. In the book called Heterosexual Africa, the history of an idea from the age of exploration to the age of AIDS, published in 2008, Mark Epprich suggests that, I quote, same-sex exception to heterosexual norm and idea were also noted in descriptive account of African society from early as the 16th century, end of quote. In the case of Cameroon, same-sex sexual relations have been observed among the Bafia, Beti, and Bassa tribe, among others. This practice has been analyzed in great detail by Gunther Tessmann in, that's German, I don't know how to read German, but I will try, Die Homosexualität binnen Negem Cameroon. That was published in 1921, translated by Bradley Rose in Homosexuality Among the Negroes of Cameroon, and a Pangwe Pale, that was published in 1998. Also, we have the book of La Pureté Torah in Initiation et Société secrète au Cameroun, Essai sur la religion Beti de 1985, 1985. We have the book of Jean-Pierre Ombolo, Sexe et Société en Afrique, l'anthropologie sexuelle Beti, Essai analytique, critique et comparatif, 1990. We have also the book of Patrick Awondo, the article of Patrick Awondo in Identification homosexuelle, construction identitaire et tension postcoloniale entre le Cameroun et la France. And Boris Berthold in this article called The Invention of Homophobia in Africa, published in 2019. And then those are the books that, engage in this topic of homosexuality in Africa, or especially in Cameroon. In the case of the Bafia, Boris Berthold revealed same-sex act among boys based on the research work of Kulfok of 1929 and Murray and Roscoe in 1998. The sexual relation among Bafia male occur between generational groups, as Patrick Awondo described it. Quote, cette relation engageait les jeunes hommes et les adolescents chez les Bafia, un groupe ethnique vivant dans l'actuelle région du centre du pays. End of quote. The homoerotic relation is part of the two stages of sexual activity of Bafia male. Gunden Tesma revealed that the primary stage, somewhere up to the age of 15, is purely playful. This initiative form consists in relationship between boys and girls and boys with boys. It takes place mainly by day in the houses during the absence of the parents. The second stage entails pure homosexual relations, which are looked upon as a national custom. End of quote. Before the Bafia tribe, homosexual behaviors were also observed during the core ritual among the Bassa and Meyungu ritual among the Beti. The Meyungu ritual, for example, marked the celebration of clitoris and feminine power. The ritual includes dances that stimulate coitus and where women play male role. The ethnographer Jean-Pierre Ombolo explained that the ritual included dances that sometimes mimic coitus and in which women initiated the menopause play the masculine role. Jean-Pierre Ombolo also argued that Beti women recognize same-sex sexual relation in their traditional society. The homoerotic relation was only among women. Homosexual acts in the pre-colonial period are not limited only to Cameroon. Historians, ethnologists, and anthropologists have written about the prevalence of same-sex practices in many other African societies. Some of the seminal essays are written by Evans Pichard, Lee, Parinder, Jean-Pierre Ombolo, Achat, Swindle, Sommer, Kendall, Deborah, Roscoe, Diamini, Prech, Lamarange, Toxie, and Patrick Awondo, among others. Homoerotism was not frowned upon by indigenous people, say Ashran, DeVos, and Kendall. Boris Berthold compiled a list of African societies in which same-sex sexual relation was observed, and we can cite the Panwi in Central Africa, the Azande in Sudan, the Fang, the Moda girl in Togo, the Mosi in Burkina Faso, the Quimbanda in Angola, the Mukanda and Kivai in Zambia, the Amazulu in South Africa, women in South Sudan, Kenya, Nigeria, Benin, and Lesotho, and the Banyoro, the Bahima, the Iteso, the Langi, and the Bukanda in Uganda. And then one case that is very interesting is the case of Uganda that made the headline in 2014 when they signed what they call anti-homosexual act. And later, that act was invalidated by the Constitutional Court of Uganda through a lot of pressure. And that act was imposing the death penalty for same-sex relation. And the fact of the matter is that same-sex practices were a reality in pre-colonial Uganda, as Sylvia Tamale argued, I quote, when we turn to the past, we find that contrary to popular belief, homosexuality in Uganda predated colonialism and other forms of subjugation. Among the Langi of northern Uganda, the Mudoko Dako male were treated as women and could marry men. Homosexuality was also acknowledged among the Iteso, the Bahima, the Buganda. Indeed, there is a long history of homosexuality in the Buganda monarchy. It was an open secret. For example, that Kabanga king, Mwanga, was gay. End of quote. The evidence of same-sex practices in traditional African society are reserved, in many cases, for religious purpose, ritual ceremonies, and the rite of passage. apprenticeship or socialization. That's what I gathered. When I read all these practices, I think that it was mostly meant for all this trope to be a religious a ceremony or a ritual or a rite of passage. For example, Alain has done extensive research on the important place of homosexuality in African region. She confirmed that there is a well-developed and unique pattern of same-sex practices in Africa as part of African spirituality and cosmology. And then she also said that in some instances, homosexual relations carry some religious and spiritual significance, as in the case of Izangoma or Izinyanga and other traditional healers. Moreover, homosexual acts were also situational, as it was the case of male migrant labor in the gold mine who were not allowed to bring their wives. Swindle affirmed that senior miner would take new miner as wives, teach them how to be a good miner, and protect them. The protection was done, quote unquote, in exchange for cooking and sexual favor, end of quote. There are also cases of situational homosexual acts. According to the research done by Gunther Tessman, Pangwe men in Cameroon understood mutual act of sodomy as an act of wealth. I quote, this group believed that same-sex intercourse was a medicine for wealth, transmitted from the receptive partner to the penetrating partner by anal intercourse. Stephen Murray and Roscoe used the work of the anthropologist Melvin Erkovis to show that homosexuality among Dahomey youth was situational and opportunistic. I quote, when the game between boys and girls has stopped, the boys no longer have the opportunity for companionship with the girl, and the sex drive finds satisfaction in close friendship between boys in the same group. A boy may take the other as a woman. This has been called gagdo, homosexuality, end of quote. Despite the evidence that same-sex practices have been part of many African societies, the overwhelming majority of Cameroonian or African in general continue to denounce them as un-African. The denial of same-sex erotics is a product of European contact with African society. According to Max Epperich, European travelers in Africa observe and condemn same-sex practice as unnatural. Quote, these were unusual, couched in vague but strongly disparaging language. Sir Richard Burton's grand overview of word sexuality, for example, referred to a Portuguese document from 1558 that observed, quote unquote, unnatural damnation, a euphemism for male sex, to be esteemed among the Congo. If some European travelers like Sir Richard Burton have observed same-sex practices in African society, others have declared that the practice is absent or incidental. Using Murray and Roscoe, boy wives and female husband, Diamini Busango Kwagwe argued that, I quote, among the myths Europeans have created about Africa, the myth that homosexuality is absent or incidental in African society is one of the oldest and most enduring. They go on to observe that for European, African epitomize primitive men. Since primitive man was perceived to be close to nature, ruled by instinct and culturally unsophisticated, he had to be heterosexual. His sexual energy and outlet devoted exclusively to their natural purpose, biological reproduction. Colonialism has reinforced the devaluation of same-sex acts and the supremacy of heterosexuality in the African continent. Boris Berto concludes, I quote, with colonialism, a heterosexist vision of Africa was constructed, end of quote. The heterosexualization of African society has participated in the denial of same-sex practices as endogenous to African culture and our identities. Busangwake Diamini stated the following, I quote, what began with denial has ended in a near taboo. A taboo, nonetheless, based on European, not African morality. The colonialists did not introduce homosexuality to Africa, but rather intolerance of it, and system of surveillance and regulation for expressing it. These systems were not meaningful as long as the reaction of the colonized was simply to hide or deny such practices. Only when native people began to forget that same-sex partners were even part of their culture did homosexuality become truly stigmatized. End of quote. In addition to colonialism and religious beliefs, the denial of the existence of same-sex erotics in Cameroonian cultures is also a mechanism to protect individual and or collective preferences of heterosexual practices as established social norm. Same-sex sexual acts could jeopardize and threaten the heteronormative construction of the idea of family. The main protagonist in La Única Esperanza clearly explained that the role of a woman in the society was dominated by the idea of, I quote, casarse con un hombre y formar una familia como exige la tradición, end of quote. In this context, the collective denial of same-sex practices is a reaction to the external danger or unpleasure of the idea of homoerotic relation. Denial became a way to seek and escape from painful external evidence, as Anna Freud explained, I quote, instead of perceiving the painful impression and subsequently canceling it by withdrawing its catharsis, is open to the ego to refuse to encounter the dangerous external situation at all. It can take to flight, and so, in the truest sense of the word, avoid the occasion of unpleasure. End of quote. The denial of same-sex sexual relation could also be a result of the lack of information or ignorance, since sexuality and traditional African same-sex practices in particular are taboo, absent from history books, not taught at school, and are object of little attention by African scholars. The absence of historical facts or reality lead to what Stanley Cohen called factual denial. That means a form of denial by which the individual literally say that something did not happen. The inaccessibility of information about the evidence of same-sex sexual practices in African culture could be part of that factual denial. This form of denial is also based on social environment. As Eviata Zerubabel stated in Social Mindscape, I quote, it is our social environment that normally determine what we attend and ignore. In helping set the horizon of our attention and concern, it is often society that defines what we consider relevant, end of quote. In this context, the African social environment, dominated by the criminalization and rejection of homosexual acts, give rise to the non-acceptance of homosexual acts as part of African culture. The analysis of the denial will not be divorced from its impact and consequences. In the case of La Única Esperanza, the collective denial of same-sex sexual practices in African culture has negative impact on those caught or suspected to engage in homosexual behavior. The negative interaction with law enforcement include discrimination, targeting, harassment, violence, and in many cases, incarceration without due process. Even though Danielle Mboume and her sister were minor, they were harassed by law enforcement. I quote, esa misma noche, mi hermana fue trasladada junto con su pareja a calabozo con otras 4 chicas más. Con la ayuda de los abogados, no se pudo lograr rebajar la pena de mi hermana. Tuvo que pasar en prisión más de 4 años. Era una menor. End of quote. The narrator summarizes the gruesome treatment of individuals accused of same-sex relation by law enforcement, even though they are minors. La mayoría de los acusados pierden su vida en la cárcel, y no llegan a cumplir su condena por ser víctimas de múltiples torturas. Esto ocurre en las principales cárceles de Yaoundé y Douala, donde los homosexuales son violados regularmente, contrayendo enfermedades. Las lesbianas, sobre todo, aparte de ser violadas, están expuestas a penetraciones con objetos, generalmente botellas de bebidas alcohólicas o desodorantes. End of quote. In addition to the negative experience with the judicial system, those accused of same-sex practices face ostracism from family and society. Within the family unit, they consider devilish and lapidated. I quote, muchas familias los dejan de considerar miembros de la misma, pasan a ser diablos y son lapidados por los propios familiares para eliminar el diablo del que es la víctima. Otros tienen miedo de volver a la casa familiar por temor a ser denunciados por un vecino o ser detenidos de nuevo. End of quote. Rape is also one of the consequences of the perception of same-sex sexual practices as un-African. This form of rape that affects women in particular is called in Cameroon viol correctif, and could be orchestrated by family members or serial gang rape. As the narrator defined it, the corrective rape, es un tipo de violencia que sufren las chicas lesbianas o cuando se sospecha que pueden serlo. Es un método de castigo, violación, realizado por un grupo de chicos con la supuesta idea errónea de que la violación cambiará su orientación sexual. End of quote. The corrective rape is brutal and sadistic, aimed at curing or heterosexualizing the victim. Quote, en un caso de 2014, una amiga de mi hermana se suicidó después de que sus padres la hubiesen tenido secuestrada y hubieran organizado que un hombre de la familia viniera y la violara repetidamente para dejarla embarazada y curarla. In many cases, the result of the physical violence on the woman's body is not only suicide, but also the vicious death of the victim. Quote, en la misma ciudad de Douala, fueron halladas muertes una pareja de dos chicas lesbianas, con los ojos fuera de las órbitas, el cráneo aplastado y sin dientes. Los testigos confesaron que en el interior de la vagina de las dos chicas había una botella de cerveza con preservativo en su interior. Además, estaban rodeados de piedra. If corrective rape is the method of predilection used by homophobes to torture women, Danielle Mboume revealed that men are literally burned alive. En caso de los hombres, los queman vivos, los colocan dentro de un neumático y les prenden fuego con él. The lynching and the death sentence are not the only cause of death of people involved in same-sex practices. Mental illness due to family and social intolerance, rejection, persecution, stigmatization, and ridicule can lead to suicide. I quote, la mayor causa de muerte entre los homosexuales de Camerún son las enfermedades mentales, producto de la privación de libertad y la persecución a la que están expuestos. In this, here I'm going to show you some picture. It's right here. There's some picture that she provided in her book. The case of people that was, put to the pole and then burned. It's a very graphic, image that that show you the reality that people are facing in those, in those countries when they are accused of being homosexual or practicing same-sex sexual relation. If denial of the Africanness of same-sex sexual practices create the fertile ground for discrimination, ostracism, and death, it also has a corrosive effect on perception of reality that generate the advent of political witch hunt. The belief of homosexual behavior as un-African is used as a weapon for political power. The politicization of homosexuality in Cameroon has been analyzed by Charles Ngebogo and Patrick Awondo, and also by Elias Bonga, among others. Those scholars mention a particular event that hit the headline in 2006. It's called the Affair of the List of Homosexuals. Two newspapers, La Météo and Anecdote, in Yaoundé, in the capital of the country, published a list of prominent homosexuals in higher circle, among which a former prime minister, member of parliament, famous journalist, and other personalities. The publication of this list created anger and consternation among the population, who felt betrayed by their elites. Nobody knows for sure if those elites were involved in homosexual acts they were accused of. Despite disputing the allegation against them, their reputation was already affected negatively in public consciousness. The attack against the elite accused of homosexual act was politically motivated in order to satisfy the concern of some leaders of the Catholic Church who cautioned the population about homosexuality among the elites. According to Elias Bonga, moreover, the allegation against the elite were also informed by the long-standing concern of notably the Catholic Church about the influence of secret society in European origin. First the Freemason and later the Rosicrucian among high-placed Cameroonian politicians and civil servants. There was a direct link with colonial history here. Besides the vested interests of religious leaders in using the allegation of homosexuality among the elite to foster their anti-homosexual agenda, the allegation also served as a weapon against the regime in power since 1982 and accused of being responsible of the dire political and social economic situation of the country. I quote, "Homosexuality became a convenient outlet for venting the considerable popular dissatisfaction with the regime, an opening against which the political elite did not see to know very well how to defend themselves." And then that's how this news, shattered or troubled the whole country, because people use this list of homosexuals as a tool to vent, to do as a witch hunt against their opponent politically. Because in the country who criminalized homosexuality, those who were accused of that practice were naturally, put to jail or other stuff. Then they will use it as a pretext to, against their political opponent. Was it true or not? Nobody until today, know about the facts of the matter. In conclusion, I would say that even though scholars use the terminology homosexuality to refer to same-sex sexual relation in the African context, I caution against the use of the term for talking about sexuality in pre-colonial African society. That is the reason why in this paper, I prefer the expression same-sex sexual relation. Even though it's very long, I prefer that term, same-sex sexual relation, or practices, or act, or behavior, instead of homosexual or homosexuality. Because we have to understand that the term homosexuality is a terminology that was coined by Carl Maria Kurt-Burney in 1869. The category homosexual was alien to traditional African vocabulary as it was to other societies such as the ancient Greek. African traditional society did not have terms that correspond to the contemporary dichotomy of homosexual and heterosexual. Mark Eppreich noted that the term homosexuality, I quote, suggests a clarity arising from a specific history of scientific inquiry, social relation, and political struggle that did not historically exist in Africa and still does not very accurately describe the majority of men who have sex with men or women who have sex with women in Africa. The language African have used to describe such relationship is, in fact, commonly euphemistic or coy, almost to the point of incomprehensibility beyond those in the know, end of quote. Same-sex sexual practices have different terminology in African society. In the book Out of Africa, Zabu Chantal argued that the expression to designate homosexuality are present in 50 sub-Saharan African languages. In the same accord, Boris Berthaud mentioned some of the names listed in Out of Africa and add new one. I quote, "One of the elements to attest the presence of same-sex sexual practices in Africa before the colonial period is also the vocabulary used to address them. The word inconscient among the Shangaan of Southern Africa, motswale to describe relationship among Bosoto women, and Gorgijum among the Wolof in Senegal are just 3 examples of this. In Burundi, words in Kirundi were used to identify same-sex sexual practices. Thus, we have Kuwerana, Kimbua, make love like a dog, Kitomba, to make love, Kunokoka, literally be flexible, Kurana Inyuma. In Tanzania, passive anal penetration was called kufirma. Female same-sex practices are expressed through the term kulambana, who come from kulamba, which means to lick each other, and designated by deduction cunnilingus. Or another expression, kujichia mbuowa pingo, to introduce an ebony penis. When they rub the genital in Zanzibar, we talk about kusangana, end of quote. All this technology are associated to same-sex practices mostly carry some spiritual, religious, and social significance. The same thing we said before. They might not be necessarily understood the same way homosexuality is conceived in Western world, as Zambus Chantal put it. I quote, "These practices, however, do not always designate homosexuality as it is understood and experienced in the Western world. Indeed, words like gay, lesbian, homosexual, queer, and other originally imported words via English, French, and other Western languages come with a hurling conglomerate of indigenous and other designations and their corollary practices. Also, the important words are not always understood or are construed differently," end of quote. Unfortunately, there hasn't been enough research on traditional African same-sex practices as part of a relationship based primarily on sexual identity and lifestyle. Same-sex erotics is what could be called homosexual acts. The homosexual act refers to behavior and doesn't necessarily lead to homosexual identity, as Deborah Amori argued. I quote, "Same-sex erotics practiced by many people in many different historical contexts do not always lead to the emergence of homosexual identities. In this context, it is difficult to know, I think, if people engaged in same-sex acts in pre-colonial era conceive the behavior as part of their personal and or social identity." That's the question I ask myself. And that's why I kind of using the word same-sex sexual practices instead of using homosexuality and things like that. The distinction between the act and identity is important in post-colonial Cameroon because the law criminalizing same-sex relation practices only mention the acts. Homosexual acts are legally condemned, not homosexual identity. That's why we talk about semantic and the language. Like in the law, they condemn the act, but they don't condemn homosexual as identity. And then many advocates of same-sex practices have criticized and condemned the imprisonment of gays and lesbians based just on their identity. It is the act that is criminalized and not the identity. Unfortunately, same-sex sexual acts and homosexual identities are wrongly viewed as the same in contemporary popular discourse. They are both condemned by the population as un-African, despite the fact that there is a long history of African and Cameroonian communities engaging in same-sex sexual acts before and after colonization. I think that's the stain of my paper. And then I hope I didn't cross the 45-minute limit. And then Akashi. I think I'm done with my presentation, and then I turn the microphone to Clement. Clement, if you see there. Yeah, presidente. Acabé temprano.
Ponencia excelente, ¿no? Uma apresentação ótima, uma apresentação excelente. Merci, obrigado, gracias, thank you. Now, Paulo, do we have comments, questions somewhere?
Not yet, Mr. President.
No?
Not yet.
So, Alain,
Yeah.
I have so many comments about that. Number one, how you can situate Danielle Mboume in the genealogy of a female writer of the 21st century in cultural production in Spanish, among Guillermina Mequi,
Yeah.
Angela Nsambi,
And others, yeah.
And not too much about Remeise people. This category, Lucia Mbomio, for instance,
Yeah.
where can you situate her? I want to do a kind of question that we try to answer, so I will let you answer that. The first question. The second one is the second question is, and this question and comment is how she described herself within her book. Does she describe herself as part of the LGBT community, or as someone who is just practicing a same-sex act? Right.
Yep.
So we need to, maybe it will be very important to find that. And the third thing is, were she writing in any kind of way, for instance, in newspaper or in blogs or in journal, personal journal? Was she writing about that, about this situation of same-sex relation, or only she start writing about that when she get in Europe? So these are my three preliminary questions to you.
Yeah, talking about the first one, this is her first book, as I know of. I mean, this book come after the experience of migrating to Spain. That is her first book, and it's like I said at the beginning, it's autobiographical. That's una autobiografía. And then where she put all her traumatic experience from Cameroon to Spain. It's a journey, and then I don't think she's a writer like the caliber of McQueen and other female writer. I don't think she dedicated her life to writing. I think this writing was, I don't want to say accidental because it happened for a reason, but I don't think it's what she gave her life to the writing. But maybe it can happen in the next years, because this is her first book, published in 2018. That's the first book, and she was born in 1990. That's a very young young fella. And then the second one about, she identified herself as a part of the LGBT community. She identified herself as part of it. And then I think in Spain, where she lives, I think in Barcelona, she's part of. She's a strong activist in that area. And then she also had an NGO. I think she had an NGO in that regard, to fight for the cause of LGBT causes and things like that. And then the last question, what was that question again? You have three. The last one.
Was she writing in some kind of way already in Cameroon before she get to Spain? Or?
No, I don't think she wrote in Cameroon because she left Cameroon when she was young, like 16. Remember the journey? She was very young when she left Cameroon, and the journey took her. It's a funny journey because when you see the journey of African to Europe, it takes a straight line south north. Her journey went south, like it went like straight south to South Africa. Imagine for Cameroon to South Africa, and that was not by plane or thing, by bus, car, and thing like that. And as an immigrant, imagine. And then in South Africa, she went the way up to Morocco. I mean, she crisscrossed the continent, and then you can see her living through that journey from 16 years old, passing all these decades, migrating to reach Spain. And then when she arrived in Spain, that's where she put into writing her experience. Then I don't think she wrote in Cameroon. She was not. I don't think she was a writer in Cameroon because she was fighting for her life.
Yes.
Yeah, she was actually fighting for her life, and it's the only one I saw so far. When I got this book, it was the only a woman writer, LGBT community woman writer that I found. I don't know if we have them in Equatorial Guinea, because I know that the women write about about it. McQueen and other write about, even in Francophone, they write about same-sex practices in their novel. But I don't know about a writer who identify themselves mostly in the African Hispanic circle, who identify themselves as being a LGBT. I don't know. That's the first one I came in contact. If there are other over there, please let us know. I'll be happy. That's the only one I found. Yeah, and also it's very taboo. Remember, it's very
Yes.
It's very taboo to talk about it. Even when I was writing about this book, I had to challenge my own self about the perception, because if you go out on Google and put the name of Danielle Mboume, you will see her book, and then you see my article, because people haven't written about her. You will see my article, and then people can the perception back home about what I'm doing.
Yes.
People can have a different perception of who I am by what I'm doing, but I'm just a researcher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Paulo, do you have any comment? Any question?
Oui, Monsieur le Président. Yes, we have two questions, if I may. I'm gonna show the question. One is from Benita Sampero. You said what is penalized is the act and not the identity. Is it that the penalization is based on proof, evidence?
Yep, that's a good question. It's a very tricky one. I think in my presentation, I say that sometimes people are condemned on perception. I mean, people say that, see the way you act, you dress, or the way you act, and then they can deduct that this thing can be called homosexual act. You know what I mean? And if in some cases people have been caught in the act, and that's how they found their evidence by people being caught in the act. But some people have been denounced, accused because of perception. Those are the two way they prove the act, either by being caught in the act or either by the perception. It's a very tricky, it's very tricky. That's why a lot of country in Africa has been condemned by human rights, or by the UN, about condemning or incarcerating, people who are involved in homosexual acts. Mm-hmm.
There is another question.
Another question?
Yes, should I?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's a question from Dorothy or Dorothy Wellington. Thank you for an interesting presentation. I agree. I'm very curious to know more about the autobiography. In particular, what has been the reaction to the work?
Thank you, Dorothy, for that questions. I'm also new at that book. When I go online, I don't see, the only thing I see online is when she present the book, mostly in Europe, in Spain. I don't think people have read this book in Cameroon. I don't think so. But I haven't seen any reaction. I haven't seen any critique of her so far, even on Google. Then I think that people don't even know that this book exists. And if they know, it mostly an audience in Spain or Barcelona, where she presented the book. But I haven't seen any critique, written about the book. I might be the first one to write an essay, analyzing the book. Yeah, I haven't seen yet. Yeah, she's very unknown. I didn't know about her until recently. And the book was published in 2018. Yep. Yep. Maybe with time, 2018, we're in 2022. That means what, 4 years already? 5 years?
4 years.
Wait, 4 years, imagine. And then she's still, basically unknown, like many other writers. You're not the only one. There are many other writers who are unknown. And then who are African and write in Spanish. They're not necessarily Equatorial Guinean writers. Those writers are African writers from other countries who are writing in Spanish, and they live in Spain. That's why I put themselves in the category of African Hispanic writers. And they write in Spanish. And there are many other, like, Clément in Côte d'Ivoire. And Senegal. There are many writers like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I just disagree that it has been 4 years because we were robbed of 2 years of our lives. Pandemic.
That's true.
Benita San Pedro is saying thank you.
Thank
And also,
you.
I think maybe you could actually provide the full information on the book. What is the press that published it?
Yeah, let me look at it right here. Terra Ignota, like, I don't know if you can see from here.
Yeah, it's hard to read.
Oh yeah,
But I can get information from you later, and I'll put on the comments
type it.
on the YouTube. Sí,
Yeah.
señor presidente. Sí.
It's Terra Ignota Ediciones in Barcelona. The first edition in Terra Ignota Ediciones in Barcelona. Yeah. It's a very interesting book. The book is actually like almost 206 pages. So it's a book of 206 pages, an autobiography. And then even though there are stuff that I don't agree with what she said, because it's autobiography, talk about Cameroon and other stuff. There are stuff that she said that I don't agree with, but in general, it's her own experience. It's her experience, her take in the world, her journey. Yeah, and then you understand that she put a lot of emotion in those things because she went through a lot. For somebody at age 16 to leave the house in such a condition, near death, and to travel with a partner across Africa by bus, by car, by foot, crossing borders from Cameroon to South Africa. That's a long journey. And then go from South Africa to Morocco. That is even like, and then cross, the Mediterranean. Man, that is a lot. But at the end, she achieved what she looking for. She wedded her partner, and then she living, fighting for the community. Yeah, it's just hard because, like I said, a lot of writers don't talk about it. Like I said, I was kind of reluctant to write about it.
Yeah.
But I say, why not give a shot? Even in Francophone Africa, even in Anglophone, like Soinka, all these writers have talked in their book about same-sex practices. But the way they talk about it is to show that it's un-African. That this thing is never existed, or it's not African, it's something important. But they don't understand that that practice, I don't talk about identity. The practice was precolonial. I don't hear to say that people accept it or condemn it or things like that. No, it's not my point. But it existed in some societies, not all, but some. It existed in different shape or form. But is it enough to ask our new governors, authorities to decriminalize it or to accept it? I don't know. But it's the fact that it was a practice that was pre-colonial in our society.
There's another comment, Mr. President. Should I?
Yes, yes.
Dorothy Wellington again. Just a note to add to your review of same-sex relationships in Africa. Marriage between Gikuyu woman in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know if I'm pronounced that correctly. And she also recommends revisiting woman marriage by Jambi and O'Brien.
Yeah, that's a good one, because I didn't cite everybody because it would be away from my paper, because I was concentrating my attention in Cameroon. And then she's right. There's a lot of same-sex relationship. Same-sex relation doesn't necessarily mean same-sex acts. They are individuals who can live together without engage in the act. And then I think happened in that community in Kenya. I don't know. I know there are women who can marry, but I don't know if they are engaged in the act for other reasons. That's why we need a lot of research. There have been few research in that area, very few. We need a lot of historians to go and dig in the past to look at it and tell the world what those practices entail back then. It's not an easy job, but it's something that needs to be done.
Another comment, question? Another thing, like, is just about reflection, right? Like, we all need to have is, when you were presenting Alain, you were talking about the denial, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if when you were saying that, you were trying to compare Africa versus the Western or Westernized countries.
Mm-hmm.
For me, Latin America is part of a Westernized country. So you have the white hegemony over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it was the case. So I will go from the hypothesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it was the case, maybe there is a line over there of try to be a little bit careful, because even in the Western and Westernized, there is a denial. Because you look the country, not all countries accept the same-sex marriage yet. So there is a conversation there about the concept of denial, right?
Yep. In my paper, in my article, I talk about it in a brief sentence. I talk about it and say, even in Western country, what we call Western country, you see the history, even today, there is a denial. Everywhere there's a denial. But because I focus on what is happening in the book and now in Cameroon.
Yes,
I Cameroon as a focus point.
Yes, I understand.
And then even I problematize, you know what I mean? People say that it comes from the West. We have it. Even in the West, like you said, they are denied even today, even here, that in the so-called Big West, this is denial. Even today, even right now.
Yep.
People can have the same topic and applying to France, German, the US, Mexico, every single country. You can apply that to your country. Yeah.
I think there is a question, right, Paulo? Another question? I saw something.
No, it's just a comment.
Oh, comment. Okay.
I mentioned to Professor Helen Ita, if I am pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, we need. I think we need a lot of critiques. You know, I mean, a lot of research
Yeah.
I know people in the Anglophone, like Anglophone critics, African Anglophone critics, are more powerful. They have done a lot in the Anglophone part of Africa. They do a lot of stuff like that. But in the Hispanic part, that's, I don't know, it's hard. Even, you know, even the book of Mukui,
Yeah.
we don't touch about it, but kind of touch about polygamy and things like that. People are
Yes.
not easy to talk about it. It's kind of hard to. That's what I'm saying. I don't know the perception of people seeing me doing that. You know what I mean? I don't know how people will perceive me, but I'm a researcher. I don't have to live according to what people see, but I have to do a job.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you know that sometimes in our culture, what you do, people cannot distinguish what you do as a researcher from the person you you are, and
Yes.
then but that's the way thing goes. You have to know what paradigm we are using to do what we do.
Yes. And I think as a researcher, we should not be scared about what
Mhm.
topic you're talking about, though, because by the way, now that you're talking about as an information for everybody, my dissertation was about Afro-Cuban homosexual, Gaston Bang.
Uh-huh.
So, so it's not. I mean, it does not define
Mhm.
you. You know,
Yep.
I mean, it's not. And we should not be scared to talk about this
No, exactly.
controversial topic, though.
Exactly.
Another point is you were talking about. Of course, we're talking about the Hispanic arena, right? Like in this world, but now like we know the immigration is hybrid, right? People come from francophone. The case of Danielle per se, right? She comes from
Mhm.
one country. We can maybe try to see, and that is the objective, one of the biggest objective of Muntú, right? Like see the interdisciplinarity on our research. For instance, number one, see what kind of space of production of culture we're using. Are we using only print material, or we can use also other kind of source of
Yeah.
production. For instance, if we want to use other source of production that I advocate for, and we go to the blogs, we will see like francophone also francophone. We can see if we dig, we can find maybe in the African Hispanic
Yeah.
francophone girls are coming out also about
Yeah.
homosexuality and the
Yep.
same-sex relation.
Yep.
Is a narrative is just an internet so it's part of the discourse, right? Like
Yep.
African descent are using all this kind of social media to promote also a novel discourse, an alternative discourse, what I call the decolonizing discourse of
Yep.
coloniality of the white hegemony discourse. So we can go there and find
Yep.
some kind of sources that can provide us also space of discussion and put that in perspective with the
Yep.
print material. Because today the print material should not be our only source of
Oh yeah.
production of knowledge, right?
Yep.
So is we can dig that, we can dig it, and I know, for instance, Lucia Mboume is talk a lot, not especially about this topic, right, but she talk a lot on social media, and she besides her print work, she has a big space about black feminism, for instance,
Yeah.
on social media. So we cannot take only her print work
Oh
in
yeah.
this, right? We can trace
Yep.
also what is not a print. That's why I was asking about Danielle, right? If she was working on other platform, that could be a blog, that could be a social media. We all need to be on the same boat, right? For that,
It's true. What you say is so right because
try to find a way to collaborate on that. But
yeah.
it's a space that need to be expanded, not only on one way on the space of production of culture, production of knowledge, but over space, right, of production of knowledge and language, interdisciplinarity of language also, right?
Yeah.
And yes, if you want to say something about that, I don't know.
Yeah, you're right because the world is globalized, academia is globalized. We are transnational, trans everything, and even the transcultural knowledge. Because in a Afro-Hispanic world, you know that to write a book is not cheap. Just to publish a book is not cheap. Most of the authors don't have the means to publish a printed book. What they do now, they go to social media. That means they go to to Facebook, they go to all these platforms. That as valuable as the printed material. And that's what is valid, what you're saying. We don't have to limit ourselves only to the printed book. We can also use other venues who are available. WhatsApp, you know what I mean? All this Twitter. People are publishing on Twitter. They put their poetry, that in their life on Twitter. You know what I mean? They do like podcasts. Those are also, venue where people can experience the world. And we as researchers have the ability to access those venues, analyze, what we look for. And also, like you say, we are interdisciplinary. Even in my presentation, a lot of my sources are not literary sources. I have to go to politics, I have to go to law, I have to go to history, I have to go to so many different, areas to understand what this lady is saying, autobiography. And then, you're right, we have to expand our horizon, to make connections, even in language, because we are speaking here in English. We could have switched to Spanish for our audience who don't understand any English, and for sure, or Portuguese. I don't know Portuguese, but do you, you know, but to attract many more people.
Yes.
Yep.
Another, a comment of Dorothy. Hi to Dorothy. Long time no see.
I know.
That is also a question from her.
Yeah. And the thing is that we can tease all this work for women from an Afro-feminist perspective. Not only applying, but also critique. Because what kind of feminist discourse you're gonna apply to this one, to this lady? Because if you see Africana humanism, the tenet of African humanism, some of them, they might not see that lady as, they might not even put the lady in their fold because she's a lesbian. You know what I mean? Then it's also a discourse about what feminists mean to African writer, African people. What kind of feminist approach do we take to analyze an African lesbian writer? Because it's not one fit all. No.
Yep.
When we talk about Black feminism, that's why we have feminism, we have Black feminism, we have humanism, we have African feminism, we have African humanism, we have all the ism, because people have way to view gender and gender role, which is not only one fit all.
Yep.
That's why it's very interesting to talk about Afrofeminas, exactly, in plural.
Yeah.
The same experience of this lady is not the same experience of a Black woman writer in Cuba or in Colombia or somewhere else, even writing in South Africa, depending on their cultural environment, on the environment they're in. Yeah, it's very important. Yeah.
Paulo, el director de Relaciones Internacionales, ¿tienes algo, un comentario, algo?
Hay un comentario más de Dorothy.
Vale.
I think the work of Trifonia Obomo, La Bastarda, is getting some critical attention, no?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some circle, yeah. And then that's also an appeal of the broader relation between the researcher or the writer in Afro-Hispanic world. Because right now is centered in Europe and a little bit in the US or in America, not America. There's not a connection with other writers who are not in that center, who don't move in that center of Europe and North America. And then we need a broader collaboration, to a broader visibility of works. There is a one Equatorial Guinean writer who live in Colombia, since the 70s.
Yes.
You know.
Yes, I met him and
Exactly.
in Cali. He's in Cali.
He's in Cali, Caliño. But how many people know about this guy if you don't go to Cali? I even wrote an article on him in 2013, even put in my book of 2019, but still, he hasn't had any attraction. But that guy have written a lot of books, a lot of novels. People know as a Caleño. Over there, they say African, but but people don't know about him. But he is in the same vein as all these próceres, escritores que tenemos. Dongo Bijogo, and his story is fascinating.
Yep.
But people don't know about him. Yeah.
Paulo, more?
I'll do a technical intervention. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
Oh, yes.
And hit the like button. Spread the word. Por favor, né? Pedimos encarecidamente às pessoas que não se esqueçam de se inscrever no canal e deixar o like e compartilhar também o canal para que outras pessoas possam ter acesso. And I use that in French and Spanish.
Abonnez-vous, s'il vous plaît. Likez.
Yeah, es una plataforma muy importante para este mundo que tenemos, ¿no? El mundo afro, la diáspora afro y también el continente.
Sí.
Que se puede hacer una especie de triangulación de todo esto, ¿no? Sí. Es una plataforma muy interesante y tenemos que expandir esta plataforma.
Sí.
Yeah.
Y ojalá estamos en un proceso. A ver, bueno, por ahora el director lo sabe, pero bueno, estamos finiquitando los detalles. Puede ser que el primer congreso sea en Dakar, en África, ¿no?
Pues, ¿por qué no? ¿Por qué no? ¿Por qué no?
y bueno, estamos finiquitando las cosas y tal. Pero sí, que compartan, que like, abonnez-vous, compartillen. You need to share it. You need to like it, the site. And please, you're welcome to Muntú. Is a interdisciplinary and international, right? Soon, very soon, myself and Paulo will put all the information. We will update the information on the site, and then we will launch it officially. For now, we need to update one or two things before we launch it. But we want to do that the end of year gift to everybody.
No,
so we can share it, the site. The site exists, but we need to just update it, you know.
Yeah.
So, like I was saying again, Alain, it was fantastic. Era fantástico. Foi ótimo. C'était fantastique.
C'était fantastique. Y sabes que, ¿no? Sabes que tenía, bueno, el proyecto que debía presentar ahorita no era ¿no? ¿Te acuerdas? Era el libro que debía presentar, pero el libro va a salir en 2023. Así que
verdad.
Yo pensaba que iba a salir este semestre, pero no. Así que...
verdad. Y Muntú is giving us the opportunity to learn languages, right? To cross our comfort zone and learn languages. Pues Muntú nos está dando la oportunidad de aprender otros idiomas, ¿no? Muntú está dando a nós mais oportunidades para aprender outras línguas. Muntú nous donne l'opportunité d'apprendre d'autres langues, voilà. Et d'autres langues, y compris les langues africaines, inclusive as línguas africanas.
Je dois apprendre la
langue. Without any further ado, Alain, merci, obrigado, thank you, gracias, bye bye, ciao, ciao.
Merci à toi, merci à vous, merci président, directeur.